Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first of two sessions of the State Revolving Fund Scoring and Definitions Stakeholder Meeting. Before we get started, I'm going to go through some slides here to help you with your participating experience. Again, this is the State Revolving Fund Scoring and Definitions Stakeholder Meeting. Some guidelines just to keep in mind: please stay muted unless you're called upon to speak. Cameras are optional. Only use the chat function for official comments and questions. There's also a raise hand icon that's located on your Zoom toolbar. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand and then we will unmute you. Please keep your questions and comments concise, and we are recording this meeting. So there is a chat box located on your Zoom toolbar. You can open that up and submit your comment or question that way. There's also a raise hand icon located on your Zoom toolbar. Raise that and we can unmute. And I'm just looking, it doesn't appear that we have anybody currently calling in. So in the event that we do, we'll restate these directions so that an individual that is calling in on the phone has an opportunity to participate as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James Cliff. So I'm going to stop showing my screen right
now. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us this evening. My name is James Clift. I'm one of the deputy directors at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. And I'll be one of the three presenters tonight. And the topic, I think everyone's fully aware that when Public Act 132 of 2022 passed this year, they delegated to the department the responsibility to create a definition of overburdened community and significantly overburdened community, and to revamp the scoring process for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. So we're going to run through each of those three sections, and how we're going to do it tonight is that we'll each give a presentation on each of the three sections, probably take 10-15 minutes. Then we're going to open it up for some questions or comments. When we get to a half an hour, we're going to cut it off and start the next presentation. So we'll keep doing kind of 15-minute presentation, a few questions and answers on that presentation. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have 15-20 minutes available that people can ask questions or give comments on any of the topics they've heard over the evening. Hopefully it'll be a nice kind of discussion, a little back and forth. We are unfortunately up against a little deadline. Our intents to apply under the program will be November 1st this year. So we do have to kind of lock these in. So what we plan to do is these two stakeholder meetings. I am guessing after that, there may be some follow-ups with individuals that maybe have some more detailed questions, but then a public hearing in September. We hope to have the date set for that by the meeting next Wednesday, and we'll announce what that date's going to be to everyone. But we appreciate kind of you joining us tonight. You chose between us and a beautiful Michigan summer evening. So we appreciate you joining us and looking forward to your input. And with that, Kimber, you want to bring up the presentation? Excellent. Thank you very much. Go on to the next slide. You've heard who I am. Next slide. All right. So first I would just kind of touch on a little bit of intro of why it's important, why these definitions are important. So when you'll get to the scoring criteria later, you'll find that projects with overburdened communities are awarded at least 20 points out of the 100 points available. And if significantly overburdened communities will be receiving 25 points. So it's going to move their projects up the priority list. and make them more likely to be funded. Those projects may be eligible for loan forgiveness on funds that they borrow, and they will also be eligible for a lower interest rates on the loans that they do receive. Next slide. And this kind of gives you just kind of a history of what's been happening. A little busy in the charts. I'm going to walk us through this here. On your left side, you'll see value of loans in millions. So that's the dollar value of the clean water loans that we've been giving out over the last 3 years. You see it went from just a little over 50 million in 2018 to over 250 million in 2021. So seeing an escalation of that money available for water infrastructure improvements. And then on the right, you see that principal forgiveness. That's the green line. And this is the dollars of principal forgiveness that EGLE has been able to provide to communities. Again, started out at around 5 million. And ended up with a little over $22 million last year. So a steady escalation in that ability to give loan forgiveness. And with the legislature has given us even more money this year to work with in that regard. Next slide. Shows the same thing for drinking water. Again, a significant increase in the loan amounts and significant increase in the principal forgiveness that we've been able to give. And again, we expect this number to go back up even further for the 2022 year coming up here. Next slide. So the goals of our process as we created this definition is that we had some obsolete language in the definition. There was references to terms that the US Census Bureau hasn't used for 10, 20 years. We wanted to make it as clear as possible to a community before they came into the process of whether or not they were going to qualify or not. So make it a little clearer and not have to wait for kind of our determination, but we're trying to make it so allow a community to kind of make the calculations themselves. We've expanded beyond income, and we'll get into the criteria as the primary criteria. So we're trying to use different measures that might, we think, more accurately pick up some of the communities in need of assistance. And again, I'm trying to minimize, we're always thinking about, are we creating a burden on a community to gather up all the necessary information to go into the application? Because we know that the more detailed the application can be, the more effort it takes for a community to actually apply for the loans. The intent to apply is a very easy form to fill out. And then once the community files one of those, staff from EGLE works with the community to kind of get through the rest of the process. But again, we want to make that as easy as possible. Next slide. Just a couple of considerations that was in our mind as we move forward. When we talk about a community under the SRF process, it's always the service territory of the service provider. So if you think about a utility, it could be just one community or it could be 5 or 6 different communities. But so when we use that term, what we do when it's like 5 communities is we do kind of a blended calculation depending on the percentage of customers in each of those communities, applying the same criteria we use, but you end up with a blended rate. And again, gets into a little bit more detail, but we work with those systems to kind of figure out how that will work. You think about the definition, you'll see that we drew lines in a couple of places where we thought, okay, below this line, someone's going to qualify, and above it, they're not. But we're always in the back of our mind, it's a kind of a sliding scale. The more communities that qualify means that we spread the resources we have among more communities. Therefore, each of them will get less. A good way to think about it, if you think about the Justice 40 initiative, if 40% of your communities qualified as overburdened under Justice 40, and they only got 40% of the benefit, that wouldn't be giving them anything extra. That would just be their fair share of the pot. So we're trying to push that number down and helping those communities that need it the most. By making the pool a little smaller, we increase the amount of support we can give each of those communities. And as we have a definition that gets broader, that would bring more in. So that's kind of the back and forth that we're always looking at, is trying to figure out what's that balance between the support we're giving and how many. The last thing to remember is we do use that this is for purposes of the state revolving fund program, and many other EGLE programs and federal programs use different definitions. We're going to have a discussion among state agencies and try to get more standard in how we define this and how we use it across programs, but we're really at the beginning of those efforts. Next slide. So the legislation required that we analyze the 6 following criteria to decide, whether or not to include them in our definition or not. And we're going to go through each one of these and talk about them, and I'll explain the reason that's either included or not included in the criteria as we move forward. Next slide. So we start with income and unemployment data. They asked us to look at that. We've always used income. We're going to continue to use income as kind of one of the criteria. We've always used what they call median annual household income, or MAHI. You sometimes hear the term of, and you look at a community and you figure out what that median income is for the community. And we compare that with water rates to kind of get a little bit of an affordability index. We've talked a lot of you about using the cutoff for the lowest quintile as part of it. And I'm going to get into more detail on this later. We just got our data sets back, and we're finding this data set to be very challenging. And I'll explain some of the challenges we're seeing there in a later slide. But that our initial thought was to use it. Now we're asking ourselves some questions. When it came to unemployment data, unfortunately, unemployment data really is only a really good data set at the county level and in very large cities. And for purposes of this program, we really need a finer grain of our data sets, because most of the service territories of our utilities are much smaller than counties. So we're looking for data sets that can provide us down to a community level. And for that reason, we found the unemployment data set to not be very helpful for our purposes. And therefore, it's not included in our definition, although we realize it is kind of indirectly related to income figures that you'll see for a community going forward. Next slide. Population trends was an interesting one for us to look at. And we realized that, there's some stories where you get in Michigan where, systems that were built for, you look at the city of Detroit, for 2 million people, a city with, 650 plus residents nowadays, a third of the residents that they once had. That's a daunting amount of infrastructure to maintain. So we understand kind of why they wanted us to look at this. So what we did on this one is we looked back on last year's to see how did population trends kind of work out. And what we found is if you went back 10 years, all communities that had at least a 5% decline in population already qualified as a disadvantaged community under our old definition. If we look back 20 years and we saw a population drop of 10%, all of them were already designated as disadvantaged except for one community. And if we went back 30 years, and looked at a 20% decline, again, all of the communities already qualified but one. So what we were finding is that even though population trend really closely mirrors the other kind of criteria that were used. So those cities or units of government that have seen significant population trend tend to already qualify under other criteria. And for that reason, we didn't include it, again, trying to reduce the barriers on the application and not have to have people do a lot of calculations if at the end of the day we think they're going to qualify anyway. We couldn't find any situation where a city had significant declines and didn't qualify. And that's kind of what we were looking at. Next slide. Housing cost and value. This data set ends up to look a lot like the unemployment data set. It mainly comes from something called the American Housing Survey. and they do kind of one survey one year and a kind of a different survey the following year. Then they alternate the two surveys over time. But again, really only accurate at the county level in selected kind of major cities. So if you go to a small local unit of government, the data ends up very dated before it gets significant. So really hard to use. Another kind of troublesome thing about the data set is they significantly revamped it in 2015. So it's hard to show kind of longer term trend data because of those changes. So again, we didn't include housing costs. We did look very closely at something called the Alice report that kind of is a metric of income and a metric of kind of affordability of housing in another number of different projects. But again, they were working off of this same data set for their report. So next slide. Then it asked us to look at annual user cost and the cost allocation amongst classes. So the annual user cost is something we do use, and we are looking at it under the current definition. I'll talk about this a little bit more later. If rates exceed 1% of the median household income of an area of a community, then they qualify as an overburdened community. The 2% for the lowest quintile we've determined does not work. The numbers came in, and I'm going to wait 2 more slides. I'm going to talk about that quintile issue that we're running into a little bit more, but this is the one we're struggling with. The cost allocation among classes is data that the department has never collected before. We do kind of a rate calculation that's focused on residential units. But so all different kind of utilities out there have different allocation among their residential, business, and maybe their industrial facilities. The breakdown between those customer classes and the cost allocation among those customer classes is not something that we've ever collected. And therefore, we wouldn't know what to do with the data, in that you get all different shapes and sizes in all these different cities. So you might have just 2 or 3 really big industrial customers, and trying to figure out what they pay versus the other residential ratepayers. We couldn't figure out a way that kind of did anything for us above just looking at residential rates. What is the average family paying in rates as they move forward? So we are using annual costs, not looking at cost allocation. Again, this one we believe would be a significant new burden on communities to kind of present this information to the department, and the department would have no guidance whatsoever on kind of how to use it or analyze it. Next slide. Cost allocation. This is what I just said. So these are all of the issues we found with kind of trying to look at cost allocation. Next slide. Then next one was existing public health and environmental impacts. And where you'll see these come in is in the scoring criteria themselves. So we do look at impacts, but it's not as we're trying to determine whether or not the city is overburdened or not. It's whether or not their project should kind of rise up in our priority list. So as we go through the scoring criteria, we'll talk about some of the ways we look at impacts and potential impacts on customers and how we worked it into the scoring. We think it's more appropriate in the scoring than in the definition itself. Again, we will get points for being overburdened to begin with, and then hopefully we'll be able to move the project up on ones that we can show are going to have more public health or environmental benefit. So we'll talk about that a little later this evening. Next slide. So significantly overburdened. So we're looking at 2 metrics here at this point for significantly overburdened. One is that if the community as a whole has a household income that's less than 125% of the poverty level for a family of 4, they automatically qualify. Doesn't matter what the water rates are. If their median annual household income falls below this level, they will immediately be determined to be significantly overburdened communities. The second one, and there was a variation under the old definition, someone that was 100% of the poverty level was automatically overburdened. We just moved that up a little bit and included everyone in there as significantly overburdened. So it's actually more communities qualify, and it's automatic regardless of rates. The second criteria works the same way, and this is a new database that we're going to be including in the definition for the first time. And this is looking at taxable value per capita. And this really, in my mind, shows kind of long-term disinvestment in certain communities. Because if you look at like the entire property tax base of an entire community divided by the number of residents, you really see where the disinvestment has occurred. So we've started this at just saying those that fall into the lowest 10% of communities across the state, by population, are going to automatically qualify as significantly overburdened communities, regardless of rates, once again. And that level is currently at 15,200. You'll see us throwing around some figures here. So we just, from the state demographer, just earlier this week, received kind of a master spreadsheet that has all these values for all the different cities across the state in it. We're doing some quality control on that spreadsheet right now. There's some duplications and things like that. So we're going to go through it, clean it up, but we're going to make that available to kind of all the stakeholders so they can see that spreadsheet and look at the same numbers that we're looking at, so that you can kind of fairly look at our program. Next slide. Overburdened community is ones where, again, we've used this taxable value again, and it's the lowest 20% by population of the state. So those that have a taxable value of less than 22,550 would qualify. We then use the same one we use now, which is when their annual rates exceed 1% of the median annual household income. So that's a continuation of the current test that I would say most communities qualify under using that test when you look at their water rate. So it's kind of an affordability index to a certain extent. Then the last one we were looking at is the potential use of household income cut off the lowest quintile. And now I'll finally get around to just have an explanation of what the problems we're having here. Two is that the biggest one is that it ends up that when you get into very small communities, it is very hard to calculate this number. So for our list of communities, there was almost 100 communities where the US Census Bureau doesn't even try to calculate a lowest quintile. There's just not enough residents to try to do that. They then calculate it for this next batch of small communities. But what we're finding is that they're at best really rough estimates. There is a big margin of error in what that number might be. So we think that trying to use this criteria right now would end up to be very kind of biased against small communities, where they would not be able to qualify using this metric. So we're going to keep looking at it a little bit more, but I can tell you now that we're struggling a little bit with the data set. We weren't sure if it was going to show us something different or not. We haven't kind of compared that cutoff for that lowest quintile with the annual household income to see how well they correlate anyway. But again, I just wanted to give people, really, this was just kind of developing this week since we got the database that we've struggled with. We don't think we can use it, but we'll continue to discuss it. Next slide. And I think, oops. Was that the end of my slides? Okay, that was the end of my slides. Let's open it up for just questions or comments at this point. And I see that Charlotte's got 1 in the chat. On its face, 125 seems high. How does that square with 80% of mahi? I don't have my calculator. Mahi's around 60,000, I think a little bit more now. 80% of that around 48,000. So this is less than 80% of mahi. But again, this is our significantly overburdened communities at 34. I want to say, if you look at the number of communities, and we get a little trouble with it when we use numbers because the data sets tend to nest villages inside of townships. So they kind of do this double counting thing, and we're trying to kind of figure that one out. But it ends up to be under that criteria. I want to say around 80 communities in the state, maybe 90 communities in the state qualify under that 125% of the poverty line. And when we share that database with you next week, you'll be able to see exactly kind of which communities kind of fall into that. I see another one that says we'll be able to put this on a map. Yeah, once we kind of get this all figured out, we'll be able to put it on kind of a GIS map. Does the calculation of taxable value include industrial and commercial properties, or does it only include residential? It does include industrial and business properties. And, you know, this one kind of, again, this is why we kind of invite kind of a robust discussion on this topic, because by including them, what happens is that to the extent that it improves the ability of a community to raise money through their taxable kind of property tax base. It also means that a higher one might mean that there are more businesses and industries in a community sharing on the water bill and helping lower rates. What we find is that rates tend to be lower in larger communities because they can kind of spread the cost over more users. And it gets into the smaller communities that sometimes you see the rates really kind of starting to escalate. So there is kind of some savings you get with scale. But again, once we share this database, you'll see there's some anomalies where you'll get a community that has very low income, but a really high taxable, you know, value. And it's because maybe they've got a big power plant in their community or whatever. Again, that's why we don't want to rely solely on any one metric. And we think bringing in 2 metrics allow kind of 2 different measures of kind of the overburdened nature of some communities, and hopefully will let us kind of hone in on the ones we're trying to target. Let's see, you mentioned more than one community feeding in. Is there talk of qualifying portion projects where regional utilities have significantly overburdened communities? The key here, and some of this comes, and I'm a little out of my area of expertise, some of this comes from the federal requirements from the program, but really you're kind of looking at that the rates themselves, we're looking at the affordability. So if the cost of a project is spread among all of the people within a community, then the fact that any one project might benefit kind of a small portion of a community, you know, gets into, it's not really kind of what we're looking at. We're really trying to look at kind of the affordability issue for kind of all the ratepayers, but we're willing to kind of talk about that topic a little bit more also. So I've got through the chat for the moment. Charlotte, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question? Or
yeah, just a quick clarifying question and then a thought. Clarifying question is on the significantly overburdened, and you might have said this, I'm sorry, but was it both of those things that they had to meet?
Either
of them. Okay. And then my thought is, and I think it kind of dovetails with the question that was just asked in the chat. There's the question of how are we identifying communities that are overburdened or significantly overburdened. But then there's also the subset of like, how are we ensuring that projects that are moving forward or that get some preference benefit the disadvantaged or sorry, overburdened population within that community. And maybe there's a way of tiering out some of the scoring criteria based off of population served? I know you sort of said that if the entire rate base is paying for it, that's gets a little complicated, but I just am wondering how we can also move forward projects in disadvantaged communities that are benefiting those communities, or sort of prioritize them a little bit more than, say, like the downtown business district or whatever the thing is.
No, I hear what you're saying. And this has been kind of an ongoing discussion. It's, a lot of times it's hard, I think anyway. And again, there's many more experts on the phone that can talk in more detail on this, is that it's sometimes hard to figure out who benefits from a particular project. These are part of overall systems, and that maybe it's primary to one, but it's providing secondary backup to somebody else. And that's a lot of time and effort spent on just trying to figure out whether or not someone qualifies or gets extra points, where I'm not sure kind of the benefit. The bottom line is this program is not going to solve all of the problems that overburdened communities face. There is going to be programs outside of this that allow us to kind of target money to particular communities for particular purposes. I think we're still going to have to rely on those. Once we get maybe through the scoring criteria, you can kind of re-raise the issue once we've kind of walked through that. Did we utilize the EPA's financial capability assessment guidance? Now this is where I'm, Sylvia, I'm really out of it. I know that we continue to use that guidance, especially as we're setting up kind of compliance schedules on the clean water side that, and I know that the permitting side kind of uses that a little bit more so. So when Phil talks later, he might be able to kind of revisit that issue for us. So maybe we'll wait on that one a little bit. Brian.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Just want to add in, we're working on an affordability planning grant right now with the community. And I think that ties into this discussion a little bit. And just to throw this out as food for thought, the idea being that I'm not sure that the clean water, the revolving fund has the ability to micromanage individual community affordability issues. And I think what it seems to be the trend will be is that communities will need to institute local affordability programs to help deal with local small area affordability issues. Meaning, if you have a community whose general MAHI is too large to deem them overburdened, that does not mean there aren't overburdened people in the community, but it does potentially mean that there's enough, I guess, income in the general service district to support their own affordability program for their local overburdened folks. I think if that makes sense, James, and you seem to be nodding, so it seems to concur. So the idea being that it's important for the local entity to identify their own ability to manage their local overburdened population, rather than trying to micromanage it from a state program perspective.
And just to add to that a little bit, you said you were involved with one of it. We've got 2 grantees that are currently writing up they did some significant deep looks at this issue. And one was focused on the city of Pontiac and Roll Lake Township, and the other in the city of Kalamazoo. And we expect those reports back later this year, that they're going to kind of hopefully provide us a little bit more food for thought about how to address the issue of water affordability moving forward. And we're looking forward to kind of to seeing those reports. At the moment, I'm not seeing any more hands or questions. So let's move on to the next kind of presentation, which off the top of my head, I don't know if it's clean water or drinking water. So we're going to be surprised in just a moment where either Brian or Phil is going to present to us. And the winner is Phil.
Hi, folks. It's good to talk to you tonight. And thanks, James. I'm Phil Ardroth. I'm an Assistant Division Director in Water Resources Division. Next slide, Kim. So I guess before I start, maybe we'll talk about that FCA question real quick. We're certainly for funding purposes, using overburdened and significantly overburdened. How the FCA document helps us is to set compliance schedules in MPDS permits or orders, and we've used that for 20 years. So it's merely on the compliance schedule portion of it, and we always meet the same requirements for the communities that are high burden, but it may take longer in the compliance schedule. So in the updates, why do we need a criteria? We want to prioritize projects for the Clean Water SRF funding. Why is EGLE proposing to update the scoring criteria for the Clean Water SRF? It's to reflect our current priorities. And this is PFAS for emerging pollutants and untreated wastewater discharges. We've had some untreated wastewater discharges for decades that have been struggling to find the finances to be able to move forward and meet Clean Water Act requirements. And that's how this will help us. Also establish stormwater priorities as requested by municipalities. Next slide, please. So the scoring criteria is going to be based on 5 categories, and you're going to see this is completely similar to what Brian's going to be talking about on the drinking water side. It's compliance, public health, water quality, improving infrastructure, and affordability. Wastewater and stormwater projects, we use similar categories, but different scoring criteria. So there'll be 2 categories, one for wastewater and one for stormwater projects. Same categories, but different criteria. Next slide, please. So these are the things that are the same. For compliance, we're talking about 15 points on the clean water side. That's the wastewater side and the emerging pollutant side. And these are enforceable schedules in MPDS permits, administrative consent orders, or consent judgments. It's similar to the process today that uses 300 points, but we're saying 15 out of 100 points for enforceable schedules on the clean water side. There's a lot less enforcement on stormwater. So what we are saying for MS4s is a violation notice for MS4s, and that would be 5 points. So 15 points and 5 points. For improving infrastructure, 20 points on each side for clean water and for stormwater. If it comes from an asset management program, 20 points. If it's regionalization, 20 points. If it's resiliency, pumping or a type of pumping, electrical systems or basement backup protection, 20 points. And this might really help us on some of the things that we've seen over the last year in the Southeast Michigan infrastructure, aging infrastructure group, on the need to make sure that we can pump, the electrical systems work, and we're doing appropriate basement backup protection. So that's 20 points on that side, on the clean water side. On the stormwater side, it's asset management programs and regionalization for 20 points. On the affordability disadvantage side, and I think James already talked about this, but any overburdened community would be 20 points, and any significantly overburdened community would be 25 points. So the maximum is 25, overburdened by statute is 20 points, and significantly overburdened is 25 points. Next slide, please. So on public health, this is a real important part on the clean water side, the wastewater side. Sanitary sewer overflows, bypass scoring. So on wet weather related SSOs, we're talking 20 points for demonstration of SSOs not meeting our state SSO policy. So if you have an ACO, and that's where most programs are established in administrative consent orders, on the wet weather side, it'd be 20 points for that. For operational issues, and that would be a demonstration of dry weather SSOs due to some structural concern that's causing chronic operational issues. That could be like an inverted siphon or some type of pumping restriction that's causing dry weather bypasses. That's also 20 points. On the CSO side, we're saying 20 points for reduction of an annual CSO volume greater than 10 million gallons, 15 points for reduction of annual CSO volume between 5 and 10 million gallons. And this is typical. And 10 points for reduction of annual CSO volume less than 5 million gallons. On the emerging pollutant side, we're looking at our interim biosolids strategy for emerging pollutants. And we're saying that we want you, if you're going to meet the 20 parts per billion PFAS as expressed in that interim biosolids strategy, then you can also get 20 points on the public health side. Next slide, please. On the water quality side, there's two different criterias, one for the clean water or wastewater projects. Use water quality severity points that are very similar to today, though that document's going to be updated. But right now that's for dissolved oxygen impairment downstream, or issues downstream, nutrient issues, toxics like emerging pollutants, and also like TRC and others, ammonia toxicity as well, and microorganisms, UV disinfection projects. On the stormwater side, it's going to be a maximum of 50 points. This is going to be the biggest category on the stormwater side. I hope I said 20 points on the water quality side for clean water, but 50 points on the stormwater side. Making progress towards achieving a TMDL pollutant load reduction in MS4 permit, 10 points. Results in reduced stormwater runoff volume. So these qualifying BMPs must be designed for infiltration or reuse. So bioretention basins, bioswales, water reuse, water storage, up to 20 points. Result in increased water quality treatment of an existing discharge. So an existing MS4 discharge, increased water quality treatment over what's in the MS4 permit, 10 points. Result in disconnection of existing impervious surfaces, green up infrastructure projects, 10 points, and result in the regional BMPs to address local site issues, clay soils to comply with MS4 post-construction requirements, 10 points. So if you do multiple things in there, the maximum points that could be awarded would be 50 points. Next slide, please. So when we add these up on the wastewater side, you have 15 points for compliance, 20 points for public health, 20 for water quality, 20 for improving infrastructure, 25 points for affordability, adding to 100. Stormwater side is heavy on the water quality side, but it's 5. Not applicable on the public health side. The water quality side is 50. Improving infrastructure is 20. Affordability the same, 25 points max for significantly overburdened communities, and adding up to 100 points. Is there a next slide? I don't think so. So any questions? Hi, Charlotte.
Hey, two questions, or maybe a question or a comment. How have you looked at over the last, maybe done an audit of projects you've gotten in and seen if you take out the compliance one, like how many projects are counted both in the public health and the compliance categories? I just feel like I wonder if there are a lot of projects where we're double counting the benefit that we're getting from that.
Yeah, it could be possible. We are going to go back and look at like FY21 list of projects or FY20. I don't know which one's the best. I'll work with Kelly on that and run through this new criteria. We haven't done that yet. It is focused definitely on our priorities. And I think if you use the previous enforcement points that are in the current criteria, I think it's 300 points, and Kelly helped me out here. And I think most of the largest scoring projects are probably somewhere in the 600 range. So I think enforcement points with like an existing ACO or an MPDS permit that has a schedule in it or requirement in it I would say is more dominant in the existing criteria than the new criteria.
Sure, yeah, it definitely seems minimized, but I get why it's in there, but it has always felt like we're sort of rewarding. I mean, why not give compliance? Why not give points to people who are consistently in compliance, right? You know, like
Well, I'm gonna say this. I think there's a lot of communities out there. Let's take a look at SSOs, or ability to maintain sewers, or ability to operate systems. I think some of the communities that are probably more disadvantaged or overburdened or significantly overburdened struggle with that. I think a number of communities struggle with complying with their CSO schedules because of not having adequate funds to do some of those projects.
sure,
So,
but they would get the points from the disadvantaged or significantly overburdened.
and I think that's the case now. The public health is kind of geared towards that direction. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we'll go back and check. It's a good comment, but I think that the compliance portion of the old criteria is probably more dominant than this.
Yeah. I'll just quickly, and I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I didn't see anything on climate resiliency, even though that's something that the EPA has called out, especially with IIJA funding, as qualifying. And so I get that they're like, oh, you're reducing stormwater. There's other sorts of ways to get at climate, but I think it would behoove the department to really think about how that can be integrated.
Okay, thanks for the comment. Yeah. All right, are there any specific questions on the chat? Where do we start?
I can try to manage them a little bit here for you, Phil.
Yep, that would be great. Thanks, James.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to jump in. It might be in the middle here. I'll go back if I miss somebody. Are activities in a community's MS4 permit eligible for clean water state revolving fund funding?
So I probably need to go back to the criteria to see. Christy Alwyn put this together. And I'm thinking that certain things that are required in MS4 permits aren't because they're permit requirements, but I need to go back and check on that. So let me do that.
Phil, this is Kelly popping in. I think that's a correct statement. If it's spelled out in an MS4 permit federally, I do not believe it's eligible for CWSRF funding.
Okay, thanks for the help. Appreciate it.
Phone a friend, Kelly Green.
Yes, yeah.
So we have one. The state of Michigan has publicly stated the importance of embracing a dig once philosophy when planning their infrastructure improvement projects. With that in mind, shouldn't we be awarding or prioritizing communities that submit for a state for SRF programs with a significant portion of the project being funded from alternative sources?
So
looking at projects that have multiple funding sources, should that be given?
Yeah, like rural development or something else. Yeah. So thanks for that comment. We'll go back and check. I think that it's also important to note too that on the dig once philosophy, we are taking all our Part 41 permits and putting them on a database so that it's easier for MDOT and others to be able to look up that information, to be at least able to say and call the community to make sure that they can be part of that. But let me go back and check on anything else for prioritization from another funding source.
Sylvia, you got a couple of questions and comments in here. You wanna?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, James. And so, Phil, thank you for what you shared there. I'm wondering, going back to I think one of the first slides when you were talking about EGLE's priorities around the updating for the scoring. If you have any kind of assessment that you did about how those priorities were broken down for urban, suburban, rural, right? Because you gave examples there, I think of PFAS and untreated wastewater discharge. I'm trying to get a sense of like what the distribution, you anticipate the distribution to look like.
So that's a good comment too. in terms of distribution, like on the SSO side, I think our orders are pretty much everywhere through the state, small communities as well as larger communities. On CSOs, I think a lot of that is the same too. It's spread out, but let me get some of that information.
Thanks very much.
to you. So
And
thank
then I had a couple other things in there. And so one of them was like one of the things that we've really been pushing on, and you know, I think a couple of us here that are in this meeting today are also on the governor's EJ Advisory Council. And so tied with like the concerns about climate, you know, we're also trying to figure out how it is that the state is trying to target and narrow down some of the issues particular to communities that experience environmental justice problems. And so those tend to deal with cumulative health impacts, right? So communities where the stormwater, where the drinking water, where the wastewater problems are on top of what they're experiencing with air, soil pollution, contamination and such. So wondering like if you all had considered additional scoring for the needs in those types of communities as we're trying to deal with communities that have multiple factors, multiple problems, right? And so I didn't hear you talk about any of that, but I was wondering if that was something that you all had considered as part of either the public health or other areas of the scoring.
Okay. I don't think we specifically brought that up, but that's a good comment. And we'll go back.
It's a good question, Sylvia. I mean, obviously, we're looking at the various programs and looking where's the appropriate places to use, like, you know, EJ screening tools and things like that. This one very focused on water infrastructure. You've seen some of the factors kind of playing in, but not the tool as a whole, trying to figure out, does that give you extra points? Yeah, one of the things that we're hoping to do is once we get our data set, we can again map it, compare it to like the draft Michigan EJ screening tool, and kind of see that overlap. But I think it's a question we're going to be asking ourselves every single time now. So I'm happy you raised it. It's something we're looking at. We're hoping we're capturing many of those communities. And we're trying to answer that question of who might fall through the cracks. And it's a good question to keep asking ourselves, I think, going forward. So let's keep that one kind of front and center.
All right, thanks for the responses.
Yeah, you're welcome. Evan, you had a good comment, I think, about following asset management programs. I do believe that was in the infrastructure part where if a project comes from an asset management program that's an approved program, then you can get points from that on the improving infrastructure part. And yes, certainly we can send these comments or the scoring criteria out so that people have it as well.
And we'll get the slide deck available also.
Yeah.
Brian, you want to go ahead and ask your question and then we can go back to the chat here?
Oh, thank you very much. No, I know that there's been a lot of concern and the questions asked about communities that are qualifying because of enforcement actions, or, you know, in essence, the rewarding bad actors with low interest rate loans. And I wonder if part of the solution might be, and you don't have to answer this question now, it's just a thought for consideration, is that if someone gets points for an ACO or because of some failure, that the interest rate they are charged be based somewhat on their community mahi. In essence, meaning if you can afford to pay for your own issues and you just haven't because you've done a bad job maintaining your system, you don't get to benefit from a low income loan or low rate loan, excuse me. So in essence, as much as I believe in carrots over sticks in a lot of cases, sometimes a stick is necessary. And I don't think it's quite fair that communities who have the wherewithal to do things and just haven't done so can benefit from a program in that way. So maybe the program can benefit then from people who have the higher mahis but just haven't done anything. That's a way of not rewarding bad actors, but also then not penalizing those people who have ACOs because they don't have the wherewithal to deal with the issues. Just as food for thought.
No, that's useful. Yeah. Just a quick comment though, on some things like CSO protection programs or elimination programs that people have been working through for decades. There's compliance schedules and permits, and and I think in that case, there's certain things like meeting new effluent limits for new pollutants or PFAS issues. In some cases, there'll be compliance schedules that I think people wouldn't look at as being because of inability to do something. It's just working through the system and trying to get enough dollars to be able to complete projects or do other things too. So somehow we got to factor that into or consider that as well.
See a couple of good comments just on these issues regarding stormwater and kind of separating the two out, and maybe we'll just kind of read through those and try to for next week's presentation, try to maybe cover that topic with a little bit of depth. And I don't know if anyone's got any more specific questions or comments they want to make on that issue, as opposed to me trying to summarize your chat here. But if not, we duly noted as an area where we've got to look very closely, and obviously stormwater sometimes, contributing to combined sewer overflows and public health issues and things like that. I think Harry's got a good one. He can speak for himself here on how do they score individually given the problems you can see. But go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intent is great. I'm just a little concerned about trying to hit all 50 points in stormwater. And if we took projects that were completed under non-point source SRF for a 319 implementation grant and put them up against a group of projects that were in other categories in any given year, we would see how they would fall out. And it just seems like right now they wouldn't fare very well.
We'll take a look at that. Appreciate it. Evan?
Yeah, I apologize for being on the no video bus here. I'm just working off the phone and don't have a good background. I think I just wanted to comment that very appreciated anyway. Like I said, with separating it out and many of the scoring things, I know I've been a broken record with Phil. So it's pretty well documented that the pollutant load in, I'll just say road runoff is like the biggest contributor to pollutant load in urbanized areas. And it's pretty well documented. There's a lot of things besides what we have TMDLs on. So, Schuler has done more recent research than the folks who started doing it in the 60s and 70s, but pounds per curb mile of magnesium, manganese, cadmium, zinc, all that stuff. So I can forward some of that stuff over, but it might be worth considering. Are there other pollutants we would want to, reward removal? And I get where, from a regulatory standpoint, you might want to focus on the TMDLs first. But I think, like Brian was saying with his comments, it's food for thought, and I'm just reacting here. It just popped into my head in seeing that.
No, thanks, Evan. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. All right. Well, with that, let's jump into the last presentation on drinking water. And then we'll open it up for any questions that anyone has or comments.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Thurston. I am one of the assistant division directors with EGLE's Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. I want to review what EGLE's proposed drinking water scoring criteria is with you. The recently passed Public Act 132 of 2022 provided us a more flexible scoring criteria, but has still 5 main categories that we work with. Next slide. So as Phil had mentioned before, they're a little bit different in between here, but these are the 5 categories for the drinking water scoring one. So we have drinking water regulatory compliance, public health, drinking water quality, infrastructure, improving infrastructure, and then the affordability or the overburdened and significantly overburdened communities. And next slide. So we already talked about this a little bit in here, that the scoring criteria is the same for all the programs in this area for what those definitions are and what the points are for each. Again, wanting to award a little bit more points for having, if you're in the significantly overburdened category, you're getting a little bit more points, but they're consistently across the programs. Next slide, please. So when we get into this area here, I want to walk through a little bit on the drinking water compliance. So we broke our points into subcategories, and we have different things that are in those subcategories. So we'll walk through the remaining categories from the top of that list that we showed earlier. Drinking water compliance is critically important to category for Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division as a core mission for revolving loan funds. This category was assigned a maximum of 25 points also. The projects need to be address current and future regulations as they relate to the 20-year needs for the community. It is imperative for the community's infrastructure to be kept updated and to stay in compliance with current and future regulations. The subcategory was assigned 10%, which was lowering from the previous score of 15% in the historical scoring. The next subcategory would put a focus on sharing managerial and financial capacity resources to keep costs reasonable for ratepayers. Some communities have actively engaged this forward thinking in the management of their community, and we want to reward these capacity building efforts. This subcategory will be evaluated by demonstrating the community has joined forces with its neighbors to improve their overall managerial financial capacity to control rates. The goal of this subcategory is to work toward increasing the TMF capacity in the waterworks systems throughout Michigan. Next slide, please. Over the years, cities, villages, townships have grown and expanded their service area to include areas with existing public water supplies. The original intent for most developers were to build a system to serve the public where no system had existed in that community. As communities expanded their service areas in the past, these small neighborhood supplies many times were not connected. This is very problematic to EGLE and our drinking water program in general because we have lots of systems out there. Many of these water supplies are having source water issues and they've reached the end of their useful life. And they need to be replaced with a connection to a community water supply because there is not adequate isolation or other, it really isn't feasible to put a water system back in the middle of a surrounded development. These systems are surrounded by community water supplies with higher quality drinking water and usually much greater reliability and higher levels of fire protection availability. These systems typically are very minimal, have very minimum TMF capacity. Drinking water in Environmental Health Division needs to focus on the limited resources we have away from these small systems that have lots of capacity issues to larger communities. And these small underserved water supplies should be absorbed within the larger systems that surround them to provide the customers with higher public health protection and also to provide them with a better quality water. As water mains are extended past businesses and small housing projects, these public water supplies also need to be connected to community water supply serving that area. We want to incentivize incorporating these underserved water supplies into the primary community water supply serving the area. Our hope is to utilize the DWSRF low interest loans to consolidate these public water supplies with minimizing the environment or the economic impact to the residents and businesses of that community. The next subcategory allows projects that are addressing public water supply enforcement to get credit for addressing those compliance issues. Historically, additional points were given for consolidation to water supplies with compliance or water quality issues. This subcategory has broadened to include any project that was addressing any compliance order in the primary or the water supply being consolidated to the primary supply. Next slide, please. The maximum total points for this category is 20 points. The first of the two subcategories are proactively addressing public water health protection, public health protection. Removal of historical lead service lines and galvanized service lines previously downstream of lead component is a proactive public health protection by removing these lead sources from the community. This is a primary objective of Michigan to remove these sources over the next 20 years. And it's a primary goal of the DWSRF program to assist communities in funding these replacements. Public health protection is a major goal in the Michigan Safe Drinking Water Act, and communities that have routinely met this goal should be awarded their historical public health protection or historical public health protection. So we give a little bit of credit here, up to 5 points for people that have had a proactive public health history. Next slide, please. The next two subcategories are continued from previous scoring criteria, as it is critically important for communities to address the public health issues when they become known. Projects that address known acute public health issues are awarded the maximum points for this category. Projects that are addressing non-acute maximum contaminant levels, health advisory levels, action level exceedances, or treatment techniques are awarded half of the points. If a community has a current action level exceedance for lead and is removing lead service lines, they would also maximize out this category. Next slide, please. The maximum total points for this subcategory is 15 points, or 15% of the total score. Consistently providing high quality water is a goal for Michigan, and utilizing the DWSRF to achieve this goal is an important way to minimize the financial impact of these activities on Michigan residents. Many water systems have areas of their system where water stagnates, which causes inferior water quality, and many residents may lead to corrosion issues in the distribution system. Keeping the high quality water throughout the distribution system and maintaining that high quality water to all residents is a stated goal, should be a stated goal for all community water supplies. Looping water mains to eliminate stagnation zones in a distribution system contributes consistently to higher quality water and also increases the reliability of that system. Providing mechanical or static mixing systems to keep high quality drinking water from stagnating in a portion of the tank that may lead to bacteriological contamination is critical in keeping high quality public water, drinking water throughout the distribution system. Consistent high quality drinking water stabilizes distribution systems, maximizing the effectiveness and optimize corrosion control treatment that may be in place. This subcategory was added to acknowledge the changing to a more proactive, higher quality source is just as effective as putting treatment on a system to address the water quality issues you may have. Next slide, please. The proposed drinking water scoring criteria retains the previous 10% of the points in the subcategory for the active source water protection program. Actively managing a community water supply program, source water protection program, is the most effective way for a community to actively plan to protect its source water and also to be able to respond to its source water if there is a contamination that occurred in a nearby area. Points awarded in this community water supplies with active programs showing proactive management of the resources. Projects that include treatment to address water quality issues also receive points, and this subcategory was increased from 2.5% to 5% in this scoring. Historically, they got 2.5% of it, or 25 out of 1,000 points. Next slide, please. Improving infrastructure. This subcategory also is at 15 points for a maximum total. Drinking Water Environmental Health Division recently updated its technical, managerial, and financial capacity implementation strategy with US EPA, and to include asset management planning as a recognized resource for evaluating and maintaining water system infrastructure. Communities need to keep these plans updated and actively utilize these plans in identifying their 20-year needs. Focusing on making water system improvements, identifying and prioritizing these plans are critical to building a strong TMF capacity. Likewise, improving TMF capacity may include the sharing of infrastructure assets to maximize the reliability while minimizing financial impacts to residents. The DWSRF program has limited resources, and communities that share assets to assist will assist the DWSRF program in assisting more communities. So basically, if we don't have to build that redundancy in all of the systems out there, then we will be able to have the dollars that are in the pot, the limited funds, go further. And communities that are doing this proactively and utilizing those assets improve the overall TMF capacity of both systems, and we want to reward that. Next slide, please. In general, replacing a multi asset classes under when we're replacing those multi-access asset classes together lowers the overall cost burden to the communities when compared to independently replacing those assets. So we wanted to have in our scoring that projects that are developing projects that can optimize the limited DWSRF resources by addressing multiple asset classes simultaneously allows the program to, again, help more communities and reduce the burden out on Michigan residents. And that is not only just in the burden that is from a financial burden, but also in the impact of tearing up streets or closing neighborhoods or roads and stuff, and then having to do it again later. Similarly, utilizing other fund sources in combination with DWSRF allows our pot to go further. So we want to reward communities that are looking at other infrastructure funding sources and giving some additional points for commingling those other funds. And so that may be local funds, that may be loans or other funding sources, USDA grants, anything that's out there that would make the pot go farther. Next slide, please. So these scores may have many people that are going to be able to more maximize those points within a category because there's lots of points that you could get scores for. So we think that we're going to potentially have more people maximizing categories. And that was one of the intents here, is to get the more higher scoring projects that are in there so it can be more competitive when people have different things within their projects to go. So with that, we have to have some tiebreakers. And so the proposed tiebreakers are project cost per capita. The lower cost per capita moves ahead. The next tiebreaker would be that a project with consolidation would be given priority over a project without consolidation. And then the third one is compliance history. And the number 1 and number 3 are what's currently used in the programs up through FY 2023, and that would be supplies with less than 2 monitoring or reporting violations would move ahead of systems that would have more than those. Next slide, please. This is going to be small, but I wanted to kind of give you a consensus back to see, or a whole overall viewpoint of what we are on the scoring. So this is a draft of the scoring sheet. And so in that first category that we had in there, we had those 4 subcategories, and you can see the maximum points within that category is 25 points, but you can get those points by adding, so your facility upgrades to maintain compliance, which every project plan pretty much will get those points. And then those regionalization efforts that we talked about in there to build the managerial and financial could get another 5 points. Consolidation could get 5 points for every community water supply, up to a maximum of 15 points. And for other public water supplies, so if the hardware store, you're putting a water main in front of going past that, or a small housing development that's in there it is not a currently regulated community water supply, doesn't meet that definition. If it's a non-community or what we call a type 3, doesn't meet the community or non-community definition, you can get 3 points for each one of those, up to 15. So it's trying to raise the awareness that as we expand service areas out into areas, we want to make sure we are absorbing those customers that are already out into the area and not creating, continuing to have compliance issues with water systems that then get surrounded by the neighboring community. The project, we also give, as we said, there are 5 points for things that are addressing enforcement orders in any area of theirs, whether it's a consolidated or the main system. That next group of points on there is on, we have the lead service line, and then we have the acute, the non-acute, and then the proactive public health protection. So if you have a proactive public health protection program, then we're giving you that because you've been good players, and we want to reward you again for doing good, but not as much as we want to reward people that really have public health issues going on in their community. Next slide, please. So this is the last half of the sheet that goes through there. So again, just kind of walking through where we are. So the drinking water quality standards on there, we've got that looping on the side. Then we had the more proactive, connecting to a more proactive or higher quality, protective or higher quality source. We gave some points in there. And the whole, you see that the sum of those points would add up to 25, but the maximum in the category is only 15. So again, multiple ways to get to that maximum. And the same goes with improving infrastructure. So there's a possible of 20 points you could score in there, but the max in the category is only 15. So there could be multiple ways to get there. So that keeps, again, projects that are keeps projects highly competitive, but maybe different ways to solve the same problem. And then the affordability criteria we talked about before. That's it. Next slide.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. So we had kind of running questions come in, and I think some of them you addressed as your presentation went on, but we'll double check with the people that asked them to see if you need any more clarification. We got one regarding the regionalization and consolidation can overlap. And I know you ended up talking a little bit more. Charlotte, do you need more information on that topic of how we're going to try to differentiate between the two?
Yeah, just quickly, if you could. Maybe I missed that. But yeah, that would be helpful.
So, well, regionalization can be that, it could be like a township hooking up to a another supply for another source that goes in there. So, like in the funding system that we have in 23, like we have Lapeer looking at connecting to GCDC. So that could be a level of regionalization as we may talk about or think about it in there. But we also have, from a program standpoint, one of our big things on consolidation, and that's beyond just that regionalized piece on there. The consolidation piece is to let's try to pick up these things. It does not make sense to us that we continually send staff out to small systems that are fully surrounded by a larger community, and they have inferior in there. I mean, they're underserved communities in there. They may be economically fine, that's in there, but they do not have the same quality of water as the rest of their neighbors do. They do not have the same level of fire suppression that the rest of their neighbors do. And so that's where we really want to focus on the consolidation. But if you were also regionalizing, you would get those consolidation points too, if you were to move that into a community system. So that would be another way of looking at it. The other side of the regionalization that we have is that, when you're working together. So if you want to go and have an overall rate structure, if you're a GLEWA community and you do water quality sampling across the board for lots of communities, that helps that bottom line in that rate side. And so that's where those regionalization type of activities in managerial and financial come in.
All right, thanks, Brian. Got a number of questions on lead service lines here, and why don't we give them more points? How do they fit into asset management plans? And obviously the questions kind of mimic some of the conversations we've been having internally at EGLE. You give it too many points. We were worried that the community wouldn't do the most cost-effective thing, which is to replace lead service lines as part of a larger plan to replace mains. That's always kind of the most cost-effective way to do kind of lead service line. So you'll see we give some points for that asset management aspect of it. Although again, we wanted to recognize lead service line work was important. The one probably key point on this one is the fact that we have gotten, and we think we're going to continue for at least the next 5 years to get a separate pot of money that is dedicated toward lead service line removals. And last year with some of the Booker money, we expect the same thing will happen. As we run out of other money to fund priority projects, if we still have money in our lead service line pot, we go down to those communities that are doing lead service line work and we continue to fund that. So one of the ways you'll see that priority is through that added resource being put into that bucket. Therefore, we're going to fund additional projects within that category, even if they wouldn't have scored enough. And otherwise, if that's the only pot of money left, that's where it will go. But again, Sylvia, I don't know if you want to make a further comment. You're one of the people that commented on this issue or a question.
Thank you for that, James. I appreciate that. And I realize there's a lot of complexity across all of this, right? I think what I'm trying to better understand too is like, in what ways, or if at all, did the scoring take into consideration those economic vulnerabilities of some communities, right, that have their own water utility in particular, and how it is that these conversations that are going on with EPA right now about how to put forward this rule, the water system restructuring assessment rule around consolidation of systems that have been non-compliant, is affecting any of the scoring or maybe even the projections from EGLE in terms of which communities in a crude way deserve to be saved and which ones don't, right? And I think if we're honest about this, there's a lot of identity and reliance, maybe even some solvency that water utilities hold for communities. So it's I understand the matters about whether or not they have adequate water sources and quality from those sources. But I think for systems that are also in communities that have been under emergency management in particular, right, and are trying to find their grounding and come back and be places where investments are possible and other economic opportunities for those residents, trying to understand like how it is that the scoring and maybe some of that rulemaking might be impacting the decisions for where these resources can go, especially as we're looking at what, again, these environmental justice considerations, but again, trying to figure out how to support communities that have been left behind for a variety of reasons. And then lastly, you know, in all of this, were there lessons taken from the Flint and Benton Harbor experiences that you all factored in to considering, again, some of the scoring for lead service items in particular? Thank you.
Yeah, a lot packed in there. Of course, Sylvia, you're always chock full of good kind of questions and comments here. I'm going to start and let others kind of chime in. The vulnerable community aspect of it is something that we're keenly aware of. And the legislature, we really appreciate the fact, gave us $48 million for technical assistance. So we're trying to figure out exactly how to stand up that program to make sure that those communities that don't have the capacity even to figure out how to access this money are going to get the support they need to make sure that they've got an equal shot at the money anyway, and advice on how to maybe craft a proposal, look at other funding sources that will move them up that ladder to get funded. So we think that's one of the ways we're going to try to kind of address that. We realize that there's always the local politics of saying, oh, this is our system, and that's a strong bond that people have with their local water utility. Even though we know that a lot of the data you look at is that consolidation might reduce their rates, but also it's the politics of self-control versus kind of what might be best for their residents' pocketbooks are at odds with each other. We're not going to make that decision for them, but we also realize that we see better systems being run when we see more cooperation, and sharing of regionalizations. Brian mentioned some of it. Sometimes they just act as backups for each other's and stuff like that. And that can reduce cost. I am not familiar with this restructuring assessment rule. I don't know if anybody else on the phone is, but Brian, anything more to add to kind of just the general question?
I don't know what the rule that was being talked about from EPA. We're not aware of it at this point, or actively making those lists, putting people on a list on the naughty or nice list. We're not doing that. So, and this has really nothing. What we're setting in the scoring really has no piece in there of looking at that. So one of the things of asking about regionalization was communities need to be able to, like you said, have that identity, but need to have the identity doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do everything in that water system. And so we're saying that there's times when you might be able to work with your neighbors to do things that are going to help that managerial or financial burden of there to make that TMF capacity. So you are viable and can continue to have your own water system. And so maybe you're going to keep your source facilities, but maybe you're going to work on partnering with the neighbors in order to how it is operated or how things are maybe done on the maintenance side of it. And so we're leaving this very open because again, this is going to go on for at least 3 years is what this criteria has to be, is the agreement on here. And so we are looking at this idea that if you're doing regionalization efforts to build technical or managerial capacity, we're giving you points for that. And if you're also working on actual assets, like you're going to share an intake, you're going to, share some other infrastructure piece in there, that we're going to give you points for that. Most of the systems, when we would regionalize on the side, aren't going to absorb it in such a way that they're eliminating a community water supply. And in this point system, they're only, if they were to take on that neighbor, they really are getting no more points for taking over completely of that neighbor than what they would be if they took over those independent things, like they shared resources between each other. They would actually get twice as many points by sharing resources than they would by actually, like absorbing them and just becoming a retail customer. So I think we're trying to be cognizant of that. People need that identity, but we're also looking at facing the reality that you can't force that upon the people in that community because you're smaller and it costs more to produce water. You can't continually keep forcing that upon your group of ratepayers and your citizens when they may not be able to afford that. So we have to be open-minded in looking at potential sharing of regional solutions so we can get the cost of production of water down and to be able to put that. And it's the same with the reliability. Instead of everybody building all this reliability in their own system, there might be to keep those numbers down. Maybe they are the primary, but then there's they can have connections with the others or share water towers or share some line there in order to be able to get those things down to the impact of those individuals. And then I think when we're talking about like where areas are in the idea if somebody's in a significantly overburdened, one of the things is it's less about the points and the scoring, and it's more about how the pots work for you. So there's significant pots like James mentioned for lead service lines. There's also pots that this is for the disadvantaged, this is for the people that are in overburden or significantly overburdened. And so it may impact the interest rates, the amount of forgiveness you have. All of those things aren't part of the scoring criteria. But once you put together a good project, so we get technical assistance, like you said, we have some money here. EPA also has some money, and we're working on working with communities to build robust plans that really meet their 20-year needs. And if somebody does a project that meets their 20-year needs, they're going to score very high in this. And then once they score up in the program, then they're going to be able to look at all those individualized pots. So even though the other people may have the funds may dried up in there, there's still more money and more forgiveness for those people that are in that other category.
Just a couple Sylvia shared a link to that rule so we can get a little bit more information. Evan has provided some suggestions we'll look at, and it gets into some of these outside pots of money, grants to look at consolidation studies, certain aspects of implementation of a consolidation plan. But those are good ideas. And again, more and more we're getting these carved up pots of money, which is challenging for us right now to figure out who gets, which portion of it. We're just glad that we've got resources and the legislature has provided us, kind of significant new money to kind of move forward with to start to address these needs. You'll see the official announcement soon, but you'll see the exponential growth in kind of these programs and assisting locals to address water infrastructure needs. Anybody else? Further questions or comments? We really kind of appreciated everyone joining us tonight. We will kind of put this recording up online, I believe, also with slides so people can go back and look at those. Our next meeting, and Kimber's going to remind me, is next Wednesday, I believe, 9:30 a.m. to, oh, there we go, 9:30 a.m. on the 17th. And we've got the link there. Anybody else need any kind of closing comments? Again, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we look forward to kind of hearing your, questions and comments. Again, just to repeat, we're going to have one more stakeholder meeting. To the extent that you're still kind of confused about an area, contact us and we'll maybe get someone to get with you one-on-one to answer your questions. followed by a public hearing in September, which we will announce by the 17th. We'll announce when that date is. We'll set that so people will know when that is. But again, looking forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks.